China is very little understood in India, and I think India is very little understood in China. Books sustain me, and it seems amazing to me that writing can sustain me. You look at the catastrophe that is unfolding, and it's a completely predictable catastrophe, You look at what is happening in Himachal Pradesh.
Amitav Ghosh is one of the biggest names in Indian literature. He has been writing from 4 decades.
पहली बार ज्ञानपीठ का पुरस्कार किसी अंग्रेजी के लेखक को दिया गया है इतिहास में, लेकिन इस बार का ज्ञानपीठ पुरस्कार अमिताभ घोष को दिया जा रहा है.
Amazon Books India got the chance to talk to him at the launch of his new book, Smoke and Ashes, at the beautiful Taj Mahal Hotel, New Delhi. Amitav, welcome to Amazon. Firstly, congratulations for the new book.
Thank you so much, Akshay. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with you, with Amazon. Thank you very much.
Amitav, you've given 10 years of your life to the Ibis trilogy, 3 historical fictional books, all about opium. Your new book, Smoke and Ashes, is a type of a behind-the-scene look about your journey. So, where does this idea germinate that you have to write a more personal, a non-fiction account?
Well, my Ibis trilogy was really like a historical series about the maritime world of the Indian Ocean in the 19th century. And while I was researching that, I came upon this enormous amount of material about what was the most important commerce of the 19th century, really, which was the opium trade. Certainly in the Indian Ocean, that was the most important trade of all. And yet, not that much is known about it. I mean, even though the research exists, most of us, we don't encounter this history in school or college, even if we're learning about Indian history. So I felt that there is a need, to present this history to readers. Because actually, when we think about India today or India in the 19th century, we don't usually think about these Asian connections.
Right.
And yet, these connections had a completely transformative effect on India, So, for example, I mean, even on our textiles, the connections with China had such a powerful influence.
Right.
So the Banarasi sari effectively really comes from China, from Chinese weaving. And yet, we think of Banarasi saris as so quintessentially Indian,
Right.
And they are, of course, but that's because all these elements of our identity arise out of these borrowings and exchanges and, out of this sort of whole hybrid space.
Right. So like we talked about China. So my next question will come from that. China plays a very important role in this book. You've talked about the chai, chini, and the Chinese community in India. But unfortunately, even though we have a lot of things, I think more things in common with Chinese than the Western civilization. But after the 1962 war especially, the relations between India and China have been very dicey. And the presence also looks a little bit gloom. Do you think that there's a chance in the future, and where do we go wrong with China?
Well, I think what has made things very difficult for India and China is mutual, I wouldn't even say misunderstanding, but lack of understanding, I mean, really there's a kind of Himalaya of the mind that separates India and India from China. So, China is very little understood in India, and I think India is very little understood in China. I mean, even if you look at the Chinese experts in India, there are so few of them. And almost all of them now concentrate on these foreign relations, on strategic studies and so on. Very few really study the cultural connections between India and China. There are a few figures, important figures like Tansen Sen, Kalpana Desai. So there are a few, but in fact, that generation has not been able to train up a whole new generation of scholars, who are really focused on these connections.
Right.
And as long as, we don't have any understanding of the way that China operates, and as long as they don't have any understanding of how we think and operate, I think the problems are going to be very difficult to work out.
The research in this book especially, you have gone into quite a lot of detail. You've talked about the opium wars, the role of opium in the free market, the start of free market, the Britishers' supremacy over the entire continent. So how tough was this research going into this part of history?
It was a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
Because actually, so many parts of this history haven't really been properly researched. It's a strange thing. For example, even with the Opium Wars, the detailed military history of exactly what happened, which regiments were deployed where the Bihari regiments were fighting and so on. There's been no sort of comprehensive account of that. So I really had to go back to the primary sources. Unfortunately, since I don't know Chinese, I had to deal with mainly the English language sources to reconstruct this history. So it was an enormous amount of work, but very interesting work, because this history is so little known, and we just never think about it as as such.
One of the most important themes in your writing has been, in the recent writing especially, has been climate change. Mainstream literature really deals with theme of climate change. You've also written about that. Why is it so important now that this issue has to be tackled?
Well, you just look at the Yamuna River in Delhi.
Yeah.
You look at the catastrophe that is unfolding, and it's a completely predictable catastrophe. You look at what is happening in Himachal Pradesh, and then at the same time you look at the droughts that have been occurring in central India. India is really facing environmental catastrophes on an unprecedented scale, and many of us have been talking about this for many years. I mean, everything that is happening in front of us today is completely predictable, and climate change is a major factor. But also, bad public policy is also a very major factor. Whether we speak about Delhi or we speak about Chennai, there's been a lot of building in floodplains or in, along water bodies, or actually inside drained water bodies. Now, water has a very long memory, and water will always come back in the end. You can't really... The whole idea that you can tame water and that you can use it in subservient ways is a complete illusion. We have to adapt to our environment, not the other way around. The environment is much more powerful than ours. So, everything that we see around us really reminds us that climate change and other environmental crises are the single most important challenge that lie ahead. And inasmuch as we fail to deal with them, we are really creating conditions for more and more catastrophes in the future.
There's always a risk associated with bringing out your work to the readers. There's a certain uncertainty actually related that how the book will be received. You have been writing since 4 decades. Is it going to be easier now, or is it like the expectations are higher, so the things are more tough now?
It's a very peculiar thing that, the books that I've been writing are not happy stories. They're not stories with a happy ending or with a sort of uplifting message or optimistic sort of endings or whatever. So I'm always very nervous when a book comes out, because these are messages that people don't actually want to hear, even if they are the reality, But strangely, my books have found some kind of audience. And I think people acknowledge and respect the fact that I'm talking about certain realities which generally pass unacknowledged, and that it's important to understand these realities. Someone has to talk about them,
So most authors stay with a single theme. They either write fiction or non-fiction. Even if they're writing fiction, they'll write thrillers or romance or something. But in your career, you started with historical fiction, then you written on a variety of themes, then you came to the more important themes like climate change in non-fiction category. How tough has been this switch over the years?
Well, I actually began my career as a journalist, here in Delhi. I used to work for the Indian Express, for Doordarshan, and so on. So I think that played a very major role in my life, because I've always tried to write about the reality that I see around me, which is what one does as a journalist. And I've continued to do journalism through all these years, So in a way, even when I was writing fiction, I was also doing journalism. I was also writing non-fiction.
Right.
And I think, if you're going to make your life as a writer, you really do have to be able to do many different things, I remember, V.S. Naipaul once telling me this, that, if you're going to make your way as a writer, you have to have many arrows in your quiver. You have to have many strengths. You can't just be doing one thing. So, all through my writing career, I've done many different kinds of things. I've written fiction, I've written non-fiction, I've written reviews. I've done a lot of those things. And then, I've also done blogging. I've done, and I think those are necessary things. You have to adapt to the times.
So I was actually watching one of your interviews in which you said that you don't like to put labels on your book. But when you're starting a book, how tough is it for a writer to not think about the genre? Because the readers will always expect when they are picking a book, they want to know the theme. So tough is it that you don't have to think about the genre, you just have to think about the story or the thing you're talking about?
I do think about the genres, especially when I'm writing non-fiction.
Okay.
Because when I write non-fiction, I don't make anything up. Whereas when I'm writing fiction, it all comes out of my head. I mean, it's a story that you invent. But when I write non-fiction, I'm very careful to stay within the facts.
Okay.
Because I think that's a kind of pact you make with your reader, that you're not going to tell them stuff that you've made up, especially if you're writing non-fiction. So I do think about that, and I think there is a very important difference between writing fiction and non-fiction.
This realm was once under the sway of Dukhin Rai. He preyed on humans in a tiger avatar.
For the book Jungle Lama, it's a different kind of work that you have done. It has illustrations. The audiobook is actually, you have collaborated with Ali Sethi. How was the experience about working on this new trend?
It was wonderful. I've never done that kind of collaborative work before. And it was just incredibly interesting and exciting. It was amazing to collaborate with Salman Toor, who did the artwork for the book, because, today he's perhaps the single most successful artist from our region in the whole world. I mean, his work sells for record prices, at auctions and so on. And Ali also has become incredibly famous with his song Pasuri, which was the most Googled song last year.
Right.
So, these are two incredibly talented artists, and it was really just a pleasure and a privilege to work with them. And it was really incredibly enriching for me to do this kind of collaborative work, because, we also turned Jungle Lama into a performance.
Yeah.
And I learned so much from this whole process of turning it into a performance.
Right.
I learned how to work with actors to see how things unfold on stage. So it's been a wonderful journey, in fact.
Here at Amazon, we have a new initiative called Gift a Book, which talks about the culture of reading and how book is a gift that keeps on giving. So we wanted to ask you that, what was your journey as a reader, not as a writer, as a reader?
Oh, that's a very difficult question, because I've been a sort of avid reader since I was a child, And also, I never just read in one language. I also read in Bangla and in English and so on. So it's been a long and complicated journey, but most of all, I just love to read. I live in books, as it were. And, books sustain me. And it seems amazing to me that, that writing can sustain me, and I feel ever so grateful, really, that I'm able to do the only thing that I am able to do,
Right.
Hello, I'm Amitav Ghosh. I'm very happy to say that I am the Amazon Book Bazaar Author of the Month. My newest book is Smoke and Ashes, a writer's journey through opium's hidden histories. This book is the outcome of years of research, which I did for my earlier Ibis trilogy. The trilogy consists of 3 novels. The first of these was Sea of Poppies, the second was River of Smoke, and the third was Flood of Fire. In writing these books, I had to do a lot of research. In this new book, I'm presenting this research in a non-fictional form. So 3 books that I'd recommend very much. One is a novel, Janice Fariant's Everything the Light Touches. This is a wonderful book about our relations, with plants and the natural world. Then I'd also like to recommend another novel by Laleen Paul. The novel is called Pod, and it's about dolphins. And it's, again, a really, really wonderful book. that I urge you to read. Then one non-fiction book, Jeff Goodall's The Heat Will Kill You First. It's a book about the mounting heat waves around the world, an extremely timely book because in many parts of the world now, especially in Europe and America, there are these epic heat waves with, I think today or tomorrow, the highest temperature ever recorded in the world will be recorded in the United States in Death Valley. So these are ongoing events, and it's important for us to stay abreast of them.